family, it's your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We are so glad that you are here and want you to know that we're committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors and offering trauma healing groups throughout the year. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. Now, today's a special episode because I want to actually start it off with a reflection surrounding the topic of soul trauma. When we talk about soul trauma, we're really focusing on the impact that racism has had on Black and Brown individuals. When it comes to this topic, I think I want to begin by speaking about my experience in Ghana. I went to Ghana back in 2020, and that experience changed my world forever. And so I wrote a little reflection that I want to share with you to get us started with today's segment. Earlier this month, I went on a journey that changed my life forever. I traveled to Africa with 10 other students from McCormick Theological Seminary. As I walked through the slave dungeons of Elamina Castle, I stood in the exact place where more than 1 million Africans were ripped from their families, tortured, and locked in cages like cattle before being shipped across the Atlantic Ocean into slavery. Towards the end of the tour, the guide directed our eyes towards the door of no return. This small opening in the dungeon received its name because it represented Africans saying goodbye forever to life as they knew it. As I stared at the light shining through the door of no return, I realized that the moment that the first slave crossed that threshold, the entire world was changed forever. The act of a slave being forced through this tiny door sent a message that it's morally acceptable to strip another person of their dignity and rights as if they are not human. And like a virus, it infected how we view people today, how we separate the ideal human from the subhuman, the worthy from the disposable, the pure from the unclean. Now, over 400 years after slavery commenced in this country, the effects of the virus have not gone away, but it's taken on a new form. That is just a small portion of my reflections from that trip that deeply disturbed me to see how slave masters could worship in a chapel that was right above slave dungeons, right? The idea that another human being is beneath, is dehumanized in such a way that they're forced to sleep in their own feces, right? And when we think about that, what does that do to a human being? What does that do to society? And we think about even fast forward to the lynchings that took place uh, for so many years, right? Where we see little kids watching another human being, a Black person being lynched, as if it's just a normal part of Sunday afternoon after church, right? And that seems extreme now, but it's still that type of hatred and desensitizing that has taken place in recent years that has now caused individuals, and I've seen this with my own eyes, little kids who say, "Oh, you're an N word," or my pastor who's white who has a Black congregation, "You're an N lover." That is not a reflection of God's love to spew that type of hatred. But how does it impact someone such as myself or other Black and Brown individuals from the community? Well, in a number of ways. It could be very traumatic when we see someone like a George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery. They experience racism that ends their life. It impacts us not only with secondary trauma, but it sends a message that we are still dehumanized in many settings. I taught a workshop about a year or so ago, and I was talking about how when generally speaking, when a white person is stopped by a police officer, obviously they're probably not excited that that happens, but I doubt that their thought is, okay, this could be a dangerous situation. My life could be at risk. Whereas in certain Black and Brown communities, and honestly, it doesn't probably matter where we're from, we've been conditionalized to say that this stop can be dangerous. And so that ignites a trauma response, a fight, flight, or freeze or fawn as it relates to, okay, I need to make it through this engagement. So I need to get ready for battle because of everything that we've been exposed to over the years. And so when we think about how this idea, this social construct that there is a race that's better than another is still in the fabric of what we've experienced today in the United States. And we're still trying to slowly undo the harm that has taken place. So I hope that you are willing to engage in this difficult dialogue in this conversation, or at least tune in and then consider some of the things that we're talking about in this episode. Is so important that we begin to do our own work around how racism and white supremacy has impacted us, because it's never ever been a part of God's plan to dehumanize another human race. And so we need to consider what we're doing about it to not only deconstruct this narrative around white supremacy, but also do what we need to do to help others to heal who have been impacted by it. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's get started with today's interview. Now, today I'm excited to welcome to the show a powerful woman of God who's doing great things for the kingdom. Her name is Dr. Ericka Elion, who is a public theologian and entrepreneur. She is the founder and CEO of the Black Culture Initiative, which is a cooperative community that focuses on the repair, restoration, and reconciliation of Africans, diaspora, and continent, with a specific focus on girls and women. Over the past 8 years, she has forged international partnerships with different countries that are intergenerational, interdisciplinary, interfaith, and economically diverse. Dr. Ericka Elion utilizes her gifts, talents, and experiences in theology and business to create an interdisciplinary model of leading with social impact in mind. And we're so grateful to have her on the show. So thank you, Dr. Ericka, for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it.
When I met you, I was like, she is so passionate about her work. I have to have her on my show. And I want to start there by just having you share a little bit about yourself and where all this passion came from for working with women and girls.
A little bit about myself. I was born into social justice and I say that in a humble way. I in a young age when I first came to Chicago, attended Holy Angels School for a little bit under the reigns of Father Clemens. I don't know if you remember him, but he is a was rest in peace a Catholic priest who's was definitely a drum major for justice. And then quickly after, not quickly, but shortly after that, I went from his church to being under the leadership of Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr., where I accepted my call to ministry um, in my early 30s, but ran from it for quite some time after graduating from undergrad, where I then finally went to get my master's in divinity and a master's in nonprofit management from North Park Theological Seminary, along with a couple of certificates in intercultural studies and justice. Then, almost immediately after graduating with my MDiv, I went to New York Theological Seminary to complete my DMin in leadership, where I was able to really take the dive of understanding the difference, or not the difference, but more of the specificity of work I wanted to do, in which that's when I honed in on the work with women and girls that really got fostered in my relationship and my partnership through my volunteerism with Angelique Walker Smith at Bread for the World, where it's an organization that she founded along with a couple of other women called PAWEEN, which is the acronym for Pan African Women Empowerment Ecumenical Network, that's affiliated with Bread for the World as well as the World Council of Churches. And it was in that moment where really, that's where my work with my doctoral studies became more obvious to me. and the work around women and girls in general really started to prick my heart, and I got really more involved in it. So it developed from just overall understanding justice to diving into hunger and poverty around children specifically, and that also dovetailed into women, obviously with children. And then, like I said, the Poween work just really took it off.
That's amazing. And you do work, but it's honed in on certain focus areas, it sounds like. And you really love to do work around healing. And that's one of the things that I want to focus on today. We're talking today about soul trauma. And so I would love for you to take a moment to define what that is and kind of help people to understand what things can cause that type of trauma.
Yes, thank you. Soul trauma is defined by the psychological, social, and emotional damage caused by continual systematic assault on Black bodies, Black identity, and our Black life. Some of those ways that trauma is created is by all trauma. So it's not to minimalize any trauma, but just to give you some specifics, it would be the systematic racism, oppression, generational woundedness that gets passed on from our through our DNA from women's wombs to their children. So that's both men and women, girls and boys, the expectations that people put on us intentionally and unintentionally, that's learned through the systems, um, traditions, cultures, and it, as it gets unaddressed or unidentified, and sweeping under the rug or ignored, that trauma grows like a cancer.
Yeah, like a cancer. That's that's serious. That kinda leads into my next question around the effects of the trauma. What does that look like if someone has experienced that?
I want to first go on by saying that's an individual and communal issue, especially us within the Black culture and the Black community. And I want to go on record when I say Black, I don't mean solely African American. When I say Black bodies and us as Black folks, that's of the diaspora, so from the continent and beyond. The woundedness that is impacted through generational trauma, that, like I said, it is passed on through our DNA, which shows up in ways that we socialize with one another. It informs the continual practice of the way of being in post-colonial ways, as well as through patriarchy, um, and mansplaining, gaslighting, lack of self-awareness, colorism, the way we live out the narrative of white supremacy, definitely impacts that trauma.
The trauma healing has actually given us an opportunity to truly share some of the pain that we've gone through that has caused us to be in this place.
I think the use of scripture and truth, along with stories that are relatable, begin to start the dialogue for women to be able to recognize and be able to connect the fact that he is in their circumstances with whatever situation.
With this trauma healing groups, we've been able to see people shed their masks and really just open up and share things that they too didn't even realize. And
the transformation from the participants really included just being able to bring their heart to Jesus.
What's amazing is some of them came with particular hurts or wounds that they wanted to share.
It allowed me to be free with some deep-rooted things that I never spoke and know that it was all right for me to speak them.
Being able to recognize their emotions from the very start.
There was no judgment. It more or less said that this is okay, that this is what's needed.
Just the power from being in the room with other women, recognizing that it's okay to share our hurts. It's good to be able to recognize what is a safe place and to be able to take all of those hurts to the cross.
They realized it's something different that they were there to share. And they found healing in ways that they didn't expect.
But once I got to that place of understanding how this kind of really does work, I had a moment of complete release. In that release, I was able to truly open up even if it wasn't to anyone but to me and God, but to truly open up about some of the things that I had been suppressing or trying to suppress for years.
Every little bit about it is a soft brushstroke that all combines to make just a really beautiful picture. For them to be able to see the different too and have some of the tools that the Trauma Healing Institute implements are very helpful.
I'm always surprised how God is using this. So it's a good place to be.
With those type of negative implications of the trauma someone experiences, sometimes you can even think like, I don't even know how to navigate this or heal from all the different things that I might have experienced. So I guess that's my next question. Is healing possible for someone who's really experienced soul trauma? And if so, how do you define healing?
Healing is definitely possible. I'm a living testament of it. And just because we're woke or the healing has occurred, there's still blind spots. So just because I'm healing, I've not been completely healed, but it also doesn't mean I'm broken or lost in that space. So just to clarify that. However, healing is the process of deconstruction and reconstructing our ways of being, the things that we know. I think COVID allowed a great space for that, for people to just to stop and stand still because it shut the whole globe down. And even if you notice the water and the birds and nature and things started to change just due to the lack of pollution and the trauma the earth had held and has been holding for years. So that process of doing spirit work, delving into what it looks like for us to really pay attention to that I first acknowledging, and or I was even go before that, identifying that there's wounds. From the way we respond to people, the way we interact with folks. Sometimes you wonder like what those triggers, what's the root of that trigger on why I just snapped due to something so simple, quote unquote simple. That is those are our cues and identifiers that help us see that woundedness and trauma is existing in our life and we're responding and living from that.
Mm, I'm really glad you brought up the triggers, and I would love to spend a little bit more time there because identifying, as you pointed out, is key. But how do we get to a point where the triggers are not controlling us? I think that's not the right word I'm looking for, but it's something where we can manage the triggers, if you will.
So the triggers that where we respond from, I think, is maybe where you were trying to go with it. Hurt people, right? And we respond from a place of what's familiar for us. So in offense, like being defensive, or not listening, and not being self-aware. So though once we can sit with and process that self-awareness is key, and none of this is easy. This is a dialogue, a conversation that we're having. So I don't want to make it sound like this is easy. It's not. I don't want to make it sound like it's pretty. It's not. I want to make sure we understand that healing is a process, and we could talk more about that later. However, the triggers have to be identified with intentionality. We can't just sweep things under the rug and not be communicative with one another, or not be communicative with self. We have to really sit with self through meditation, through prayer, and understanding that we are a work in progress. Yes, not to sound cliche, and that doesn't give us a crutch to live from a space of our hurt that has been imparted on us through, like I said, these systems, the narratives of white supremacy, and we have to identify those narratives and not live in them and call them out to be what they are.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I would love to shift gears now to talk about the healing process from all this. It's as we discussed and see, it's so much more. It's a very difficult journey, but what steps can someone begin to take to heal from soul trauma?
Because the soul is an internal and it's the deposited gift of God, which is different than our spirit. I want to be clear with that. Spirit and soul are not the same. With that being said, we have to go within. It's not the self care that people want to define as what I call maintenance, self maintenance. Self care, self love are the internal work. Self maintenance is the haircuts, the massages, the manicures, the facials that people say, I want to do self care. Practicing self care is a way of self love and giving, giving back to self. Um, but once we dive into self and the internal self, the capital S self, and giving attention to that as well as the soul work required, that's when we can start identifying those triggers. We can start processing where those triggers came from. And again, this is not easy. This is dialogue and just articulating the steps and the processes. So it's not this simple one, two, three, and it doesn't happen quickly. It does happen though. And it comes with, like I said, understanding that going to conferences and listening to motivational speakers and sermons and reading these self-help motivational books by Alanya Von Zant. This is not knocking any of that. But I am saying is that those are quick fixes to help keep you on track. But your lifestyle must change. This is a lifestyle mindset. And once we start shifting our lifestyle, and re-socializing ourselves, if you will, we could start to see the ways of our lives shifting, the language and the behaviors and how we be and what we do change. The way we interact with people, we'll hear things differently. We'll see not just with our naked eye, but with our spiritual eye, if you will, see life in a different way.
When we look at how there could be post-traumatic growth, and I know we're running short for time, so I might just have to have you back on the show. But briefly, briefly, if you can talk about growth that comes from the healing work that can be done.
Yeah, post-traumatic growth is a term that was, or I should say, a theory that was developed in the like I think the 1990s ish. And it describes the way it speaks to the transformation that occurs from trauma. Just like it says, post traumatic. So it's after the trauma. Like I said earlier, it can be found in the way we talk, the language we used, as benchmarks, because there's no real way to gauge spiritual growth, because unless you see it, the only way you can see it is in behavior. There's no weight that you could put, no numbers or quantifiers that you can put that's an actual tangible result. You just see it in the way you be. And it's definitely attainable. It's an attainable process to get there. Like I said earlier, when you said can healing occur? Absolutely. This conversation alone is a process of knowing that it's possible and that you can see the actual growth. If you only have known me before, right? My dialogue, my conversation, my understanding was quite different. And that's where though when those shifts occurs in your ways of being, that's when you can see the post-traumatic growth occurring. That's when that you can just see it. That's when you can identify it.
Mhm. And based on just everything I'm learning about you, you are really living that out, helping other people from your growth. And I'd just love for you to briefly share, what are you doing now in ministry to help individuals in this area?
Because it's a lifestyle. It is inserted in all things, in all facets of my life. I mean, from the time I wake up in the morning. But then there's that also like I said, inserting it into my day-to-day life as a mentor for the organization I work for now with young girls throughout the south side of Chicago and the south suburbs. Counseling. I counsel many clergy folks. A lot of them are friends and sister friends in the movement. The writings that I have done, interviews, platforms, lectures. As a womanist and as a Black liberationist, you can better believe in my sermons when I do preach. that's when that's I see it. You know, it's impossible not to see it within the text. These, just due through my studies, and different technologies or avenues in that capacity.
Yeah, yeah, and I would love to explore some of the great things you're doing and have our audience connect with you. So, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Via IG and Facebook, those are probably the best ways. Can I be Googled? Yes, but also some other things might pop up because the social media, that you grab people can grab anything, but YouTube's other interviews are on there. Some of the work I've done with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, that can be pulled up on that. Dialogues.
Yeah, there's a lot on it. So, you'll find her if you search the internet, but the best place, it sounds like, you'll find her is on IG and Facebook. But I thank you, Dr. Erica, for being on the show and just being real and candid about this important topic, and blessings to you and your ministry. May God continue to use you in this important work.
Yeah. If I could say one last thing as a sign off, if there was something that I could tell someone who may be going through healing of any kind from trauma, I just want to encourage you to trust the process of this journey. And now that's easier said than done, Erica. I absolutely know that. And in that process of trusting, to be kind to yourself, and that being kind is because of the fact that you have to remember how long it took this trauma to impact you and how long you lived in that trauma. So that means that will require you to give yourself that much time to heal.
That's that's key. And I thank you for sharing that because someone needed to hear that. Thank you again, Erica. Appreciate you. Blessings.
Thank you. Same to you. I appreciate you for having me
Yes, thank you
and
for being
trusting me
here.
with your audience.
Yes, they needed to hear this message, and I thank you all for tuning into this episode. I hope you were blessed by it, and if you were, you know what to do. Please leave a five-star review for us on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and share this with a friend so we can get this message out to the world. And if you are looking for Christian resources to help you with trauma, check out our websites for information on free resources and so much more at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. So that's it for this week. Thank you again for tuning in. And until next time, you keep your faith on the journey.